Okay, Constellation Training 2018-19, fifth weekend, January 12th, morning session 1.
Excellent. So we have Katerina and Maria Elena and Jeff and me, Leslie, and theoretically, hopefully, we'll be having Lily sign in sometime soon. If that happens, there just could be a moment of troubleshooting to get her fully on board. So I wanna prepare for that possibility. So for our starting ritual, this weekend we are looking at a few different things because there's time, but today in particular we're going to look at organizational constellations that I know a lot of people are really interested in. So in kind of a simplistic version, not simplistic, but we're not going into advanced levels on this, but that takes us into the realm of what? Of work. Okay. So a lot of my clients, and if you start getting clients, come to you with the issues around work. Even people who are coming for family constellations are like, I seem to be underemployed, I seem to be in debt, I seem to have jobs I hate, I don't know what I want to do with work, I'm very successful financially, but very unhappy personally in my work. All those, I've got a crazy situation at work. People come with these things pretty frequently because work takes up so much of our life. And it's got this, work in many ways is the adult version of the breast, right? It's what puts a roof over our heads and puts food on the table. And if we have obligations to other people, then for them as well, right? And so when work isn't working well, it creates things. It's got this like, oh, am I going to be okay? Am I going to be down in the tent city down underneath the underpass, or are my children, right? That kind of thing. So most of these issues are fully addressable in the normal family constellations context because of how related they are to family of origin stuff. Yeah. So one thing I realized a few years ago, and once I realized this and worked with it a little bit, it pretty much cleared up, which is nice, was that I had a father who went through the Depression. Yeah. And so when he was sort of really into math and the beauty and abstractions of math, even years later when he wasn't doing it as a profession, he liked to, in a way that was very tedious for a child, sort of preach on the abstract beauties of mathematics, right? For those of you who had a hard time with math in grade school, this is incomprehensible, but he saw it like art. He did. And when he was a young man, this thing called IBM came along. And, all the beauty of math and the Depression. So he signed up with IBM to protect himself. Really, the meanings that came through for many in that generation is nothing comes before security. Nothing. Not joy, not meaning, not desire, not beauty, nothing. So my dad signed up for IBM, which slowly destroyed his spirit. Or to be fair to IBM, it wasn't all IBM's fault, but it was part of the loss of soul, my father's soul path, whatever that might have been. And I have very, very strong memories in childhood. So this is the 60s and 70s of my father getting dressed in the patent leather shoes. And remember when men all wore hats? Mm-hmm. And he'd put on the tie, and he'd put his watch in his pocket with a change. He had such a ritual in the morning, and he'd go off and drive off into the commuter life into IBM. And then he'd come home and drink all night, right? So I had a very, very strong, and I remember one day when I was 10 or so, when kids are saying, my dad is a fireman and my dad is a whatever, right? What does your dad do? And I'm like, oh, I don't know what my dad does. And so I went home and said, Dad, what do you do? What do you actually do? He had become middle management. Believe me, math had nothing to do with his life anymore, or very little. And he said, I have learned to write the perfect memo. Can you feel the stab in the heart?
Wow.
Yeah. And the imprint for me was to wake up early in the morning and know everything you're about to do is pointless and robbing your soul. And yet you have to get up and do it anyway, every day, 5 days a week. I wrestled. I remember the day when I finally figured this out with a practitioner, because I was having really bad morning at wake-up anxiety, and realized I was wrestling with that imprint. And it's mostly gone away since then. So when I honored what my father did for work to take care of us, right, to the degree that he knew how. So what I want us to do for the morning ritual is, for many of my clients, what I'm doing is helping them connect with the work that their ancestors have done, for better or for worse, to care for and support their families. Honorable work, dishonorable work, barely getting by work, 1% wealthiest work, work they love, work they hated, right? Because if we don't have a good place in our heart for the work that our forebears did, then it puts us in a funny relationship to work generally. You know, we're in that what we resist persists kind of stuff. So, and every once in a while, I'm just going to check here and see if I've gotten any kind of nope, no messages. So this little ritual is, it really is a ritual. It's meant to connect you with the world of your ancestors' work from a place of respect and honoring. So just take a moment, think about what your, and yes, we want to include so-called women's work, homemaking, as it used to be called. But just for a moment, think about what your parents did, and what your grandparents did, if you know, and the general impressions or guesses you have about what your other ancestors did. You know, farmers, blue-collar workers, professionals, aristocrats who actually probably relied on the work of others. You know, potato hoers. Just for a moment, think about, and give labels. Oh, I have a lot of nurses. Oh, I have a lot of clergy. I have a lot of clergy in my background. Businessmen and clergy in my background. Think about them, okay? And then you're going to do what I'm going to do, okay? Which is, remember we did, you know, my name is Leslie, daughter of, granddaughter of, blah, blah, blah. It's one way of naming where we come from. So this is going to be similar to that, okay? So my name is Leslie, daughter of John and Helen, a lover of math and middle manager and homemaker and lover of food. I come from clergy and missionaries, a lot of missionaries, and businessmen and politicians. And I asked my ancestors to bless me in my work. Next.
My name is Katharina, daughter of Hans and Ursula. Find the English words. Daughter of You run an advertising agency. Marketing,
Yeah.
marketing, self-employed person, and a homemaker, both lovers of gardens and food and animals. I come from a line of farmers and ranchers and tradesmen. And yeah, that's what I remember. And I asked my ancestors to bless my vote.
My name is Maria Elena, and I come from Guillermo and Elena. And
Pause for one moment. In the dark. And we're going to need to move your book. Hola. Hi, Lily. Are you speaking? We can't hear you yet. Yeah, that's not working.
Sound?
We can't hear you at all. So anything you're saying, we can't hear.
Yeah, I muted myself.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah. Let me see if there's any lights in here. There's some lights. Okay. All right. I'm going to sit right here. Okay, so I'll mute myself again when you guys are ready.
Yeah, but it wasn't working, so sometimes I have to redo it.
I put my stuff on this other chair in the hotel of or the lobby of my.
It sometimes takes a second to find.
Okay.
So make some noise for a moment. Just say something.
Hello.
We're just trying to get the speaker going.
Mm-hmm. Hello?
Yeah.
Doesn't want to connect to the speaker here.
And we may need to put this aside until the break, but
It's all gone now? Or did you turn it back?
I'm going to turn it back on again. Say something again, Lily.
Mm-hmm. Hello.
Come on, speaker, speak.
Okay, I'm not going to waste time on this for now. We'll just use the speaker set that's already default using. So just don't even worry about that. It's working.
Yeah.
It's right. I turned it off.
Okay.
So do this. Okay, we are busy doing a ritual, and now she's frozen. So she will come and join us when she's unfrozen.
Made it. Of course, it's distance.
It's not distance, it's the reliability of the internet. It's the other thing. On both ends, by the way. I hope this doesn't take up too much energy over the course of the day. No, we're still okay here. We're going to trust that it's on her end and she's troubleshooting. Oh, there we go. You're back now. Okay, so start over again, Maria Elena.
okay, I'm Maria Elena, and I come from Guillermo and Elena, and from blacksmith work, hard work, and a lot of creativity in the work to make train parts.
Mm-hmm.
And homemaker, also very creative to try to find a way to make a little bit more money to make meat end. And in my family, there is a lot of, not sure about my ancestors, but very firm work ethics, very strong work ethics. And
If you were to imagine, what kind of work do you imagine your ancestors did?
I know from my father's side, they came from England to work on the railroad.
Okay, so railroad workers.
Railroad, yeah, I'm not sure what kind.
So I'm going to invite you to stay in ritual mode.
Mhm.
I come from railroad workers.
I come from railroad workers.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Anyone else? Anything else?
Also from I don't know how to say hotelería. Food making and
Cooks.
cooks, yes, chefs,
Okay.
and, yeah.
Okay. And then the last sentence, and I ask my ancestors to bless me in my work.
And I ask my ancestors to bless me.
Okay. So I'm just going to remind people this is a ritual.
Mm.
So instead of moving into conversation about the family,
Mm.
I come from, and it gives us weight. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Jeff?
My name is Jeff, son of Leo and Phyllis. Come from, I'm pretty sure, old blue-collar workers. My father was a sheet metal shop foreman. When Sylvania had a factory here, and Sylvania was kind of a big deal, which I think for him was...
So I'm going to really, people stay in
Yeah.
ritual mode. You come from sheet metal or sheet metal worker, or what was the title?
He was foreman of a sheet metal shop.
Okay. He was a foreman. Oh.
Yeah. Which I think he was proud because he never even finished high school. And glass, I was a glass technician, made very specialized vacuum tubes. So whatever you call that, come from that. I don't know much about the ancestors, what they did. Possibly forestry. I really don't know.
Can you say whatever work my ancestors did, I asked them to bless me in my work?
Whatever work my ancestors did, I asked them to bless me in my work.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So Lily, what we're doing on our way to Organizational Constellations Day is just to say, my name is, daughter of mother's name and father's name, and their work, and then whatever professions or vocations or work that we know our ancestors did. So, I come from ranchers and teachers and whatever, okay? And then finish up with this, ask them to bless me in my work, okay? So your turn.
Okay. I'm Lily, daughter of Yuan Yuan and Jen Chao, and my ancestors were writers and teachers and scientists, and I asked them to bless me in this work.
Excellent. Just want to double check something. Yes, it is recorded. Great. So, remember I learned this lesson very early on one time with I don't even remember what the client's issue was, but the intervention was just her seeing her kind of very impoverished potato farmer ancestors and really bowing to them and respecting the work that they did. which was very eye-opening because that was not work that at that time her family had taught her to respect and honor. And what it took to endure. Yeah. So let's just do a little check-in. How's everyone doing? What are the questions you bring in? Did you guys get to a study group? How's it going? What's up? How's your lives? We all just went through the holidays and New Year's. So just a little bit check-in. How's everyone doing? How are we feeling this morning as we launch into 2 days?
So this morning I feel a little fragile. Overall things are running. I don't have any problems, any questions. I had a nice holiday time. I spent this time with my kids, just the three of us, no family at all. Tiny Christmas tree and lots of movie watching. So, it was very nice. It was very quiet and peaceful. And since the new year started, I have my biggest month of the year. January is always the month of double the work I usually do.
Oh no,
Which is
you're already doing too much.
Yeah, January is, I always prepare like the last few days of December to start every morning at 5 or 6 and work through the evening till late because there's a lot of extra reporting and extra stuff to close the books for the year for all clients. It's every year the same, so. So I'm a little overworked currently. But
Is that most of the source of the fragility, or is there something else? Okay, just overworked.
Yeah, just like not a lot of sleep and all of these tasks besides my regular life with 2 kids. So I feel like,
Okay.
but good in good spirits otherwise.
Okay. Thank you. And you're excited about this topic.
Yes,
You are.
yes,
Yeah.
that's why the battle of do I want to stay in bed and sleep all weekend or come here? Coming here, we have to win immediately.
Good. Other check-ins.
I'm I'm doing okay actually. I was getting sick, but I'm determined not to get sick. Yeah, we had a very nice and quiet, well, not so quiet, Christmas and New Year's, with family and friends, and it was very nice. I'm feeling much more stronger than last year, and emotionally. I think with the work of all of the family constellations that were done. So in that sense, I feel like in a very nice space now. And I'm ready for today.
Great. Does it feel in order in this intimate group to just say a word or two about the last piece of work you and I did?
Oh, I was stronger now that you mentioned it. I got very emotional again.
But I think it's what you just kind of referred to, that this is made for a calmer holiday.
Yeah, sure. I can say a little bit. And
I mean, just to say what we looked at.
yeah, actually, we had a contact with Raul, my husband.
I stood in Raul with
Yeah.
her.
And it was very interesting to know what I knew. Well, yeah. I think his sickness was so fast, so that nobody was prepared for the end of it,
Yeah.
And
I'm going to invite you not to relive it.
Yeah.
But just that you got to say hello to Raul.
Yeah.
And maybe do a little releasing.
Yeah, actually, yeah, it was intense but beautiful. I think it was beautiful to realize, how was it for him?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I only knew my part.
Right.
I actually I didn't know the the totality of my part. The feeling and all that. But it made me think about how is all of this. It's a question that I always ask. How is it that? How is it? I know that death is part of life. That's what my feeling is. That's what I believe. But then just having the opportunity to hear what happened, or at least, the confirmation. I mean, the question that Raul asked, did I die?
Right.
It was impacting.
Yeah.
But it was,
Yeah.
it was very good. It was very good because I was able to just really think about, oh yeah, I'm holding him. I've been holding him too long, So I've been talking to him a lot lately.
Oh, good. That's nice. That's great.
and letting him know that I had to let him go.
Cool. Excellent. Thank you. Jeff or Lily? A little bit of a check-in?
Not really much to say. I don't really get involved in the holidays much. If I can avoid it, which I can.
Mm-hmm.
So things are pretty much as usual.
Ready for the weekend?
We'll find out.
Okay. And Lily, are you hearing us okay? I just want to make sure you're hearing us okay.
While Maria Elena was talking, it was like getting very the sound got really digital.
That's just that's internet.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So to the degree that you froze for a little while for us. That's just internet stuff. The quality of the connection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Overall, yeah. So I'm in Thailand, and there is a lot. I'm doing pretty okay. I just met a bunch of people who are doing the kind of business stuff that I want to do, like all this, like all these like lifestyle businesses, and there's a great community here actually. But it's been also like stressful to just be here, and not sure like when I'm going to come back or when I'm going to go to another country so it's like it's like fun sometimes, and it's like stressful and like unclear like other times.
Sounds like you're on an adventure.
Yeah.
Excellent. And I am doing well. I survived the 5 days with my brother and his wife. And Yosemite is magical. Yosemite is Yosemite. And what I'm learning, what I kind of learned, because I've had a lot of around my brother for a while, because he went about 10 years ago through a whole process of disowning me, which was very painful. And then he sort of, like, I worked to kind of reestablish the relationship, and now it's kind of going okay. And I still have this grudge. I'm like, hey, but this thing happened. And it was bad. And why were you such a jerk back then? And just really learning that, family, if you want to be in relationship with family, you got to let that shit go.
Yeah.
You just do. He seems to be giving me an opportunity for a reset. He's kind of doing it on his end. And so now this is my opportunity if I'm willing to do that. And that's tricky, but I'm working hard to be in connection with some cousins who are up in Seattle. And I talked to one cousin who's 70, so the eldest of my cousins, who are people I'm not in a lot of contact with. And of his family, he's the one I'm in most contact with compared to his brother and sister. And he said, yeah, because the other cousin's family is exploding around the death of their father and whatnot. And he said, yeah, you know, when our mom died, we just said we're not gonna let anything get in the way of being in relationship. We're just not. We're different people with different interests and different political views and different personalities, but we're going to see each other twice a year and we're going to be in relationship. And and I really admired that. I thought that was a pretty brave choice. And obviously with a lot of positive results for all of them, because that means they've got nieces and nephews and relationships and yeah. So I'm trying to take that all to heart. Yeah. And it's a new year, 2019. What shall it bring? Okay, y'all ready to have me dive into this topic?
Anytime.
Okay, so I don't know if, especially so that Lily can see the thingamajiggy. Thingamajiggy. Okay, so I've given some of the context for this, and I'll try and stand the picture as well. Which is that, you know, in normal family constellations work, you are dealing with work-related stuff all the time. You know, sometimes people who train people on, you know, once you've, like, say, become a coach, what are the 3 areas to niche in, right? The 3 areas generally are understood as work, relationships, and health. So in some sense, you know, work is 30% of what we go to people for help with, individuals. And I talked in, you know, my little intro, people can come and say, I hate my job, I need a new job, or, you know, I'm not making enough money, I'm unhappy in my chosen profession, I'm an artist, but I can't seem to make money at it, I'm chronically underemployed. That's a really common one, really bright, brilliant people, and all they do is like temp work, right? So this is all very firmly in the land of family constellations work. You'll probably be asking, what happened to dad? What happened to mom? What is the work that they did? It can also be related to the things we talked about last weekend around attachment stuff. When we have an interrupted reach for the breast, it can extend to an interrupted reach for work, for sustenance and all that stuff. This is not what we're going to talk about today, but I'm just saying this is kind of prologue. The context of work is very properly in the context of everything you've been learning, okay? Sometimes, however, if you're in the family constellations world mostly, a genuine organizational issue is going to come your way. You know, I am, you know, the vice president in charge of personnel at my company, and we cannot seem to get into a good relationship with the board chair in charge of ethics, and it's creating havoc in our department, right? Or someone in charge of a small nonprofit is trying to negotiate the purchase of some land for their nonprofit, yeah? And something has interrupted the negotiation, which up until that moment seemed to be going just fine. Yeah? It can be small things, it can be large things. The reason why I want to talk about this topic with you is mostly that these issues will arise for you, and organizational constellations are a little bit different than family constellations. And in the early years of doing constellations work, people would say, "Oh, you're Bert Hellinger." In the early years of constellation work, come in and help us with our personnel department problem. And they would kind of cause havoc because they would start applying family constellations rules to business environments, and it really wouldn't work. Now, I have to be honest with you, I still see this problem to this day, okay? So the constellations person, one of the early German guys, he's still out there working. If you're lucky enough, I think he did something in Connecticut just last year. He still does get around, but he was the first one who really got, there's something different here, and really got into it. His name is Gunt Hart Weber. There are now many organizational constellations people. But he was really the first one who's an immediate sort of colleague and student of Bert Hellinger. So he was in the early years of developing. Is he on the cover of that?
Yeah, he wrote the book, no, with Hunter Beaumont.
Yeah, I wonder how much he's actually involved in that. Katerina is holding up Love's Hidden Symmetry. But he's really involved in the early years of family constellations, and then family constellations, and then this work part, organizational piece came off that clearly was something different. I'm going to circle back to that. So the first thing I want to say before we dive into this, and I've mentioned this before, but now I'm going to go into this in a little bit more depth, is that, in many corners you may have heard people, instead of calling it family constellations, they call it systemic constellations, right? And the reason is that they became clear that it applied to things other than just family systems, okay? And that there are different kinds of systems that you can apply it to. So we've got family. Now, that by itself will keep you busy forever, right? Just because we all come from families, and pretty much everything connects to families in some way or another. But there are other kinds of systems. In this case, we're looking at orgs. Another one that it's been applied to is natural systems. And I can imagine, if you wanted, there are other kinds of systems that people have. For instance, if you want to apply it to chakra system, right? Okay. And I'll just put this, other, like chakras, or 5-element Chinese, or enneagrams, or all these different kinds of, there are systems out there that people have, right? In each of these instances, remember, we've got this thing called the orders of love. What Bert Hellinger what gradually became clear was that the orders of love that Bert Hellinger and his colleagues empirically observed in family constellations, and those are the ones you've come to know and love, are family orders of love. Yeah? But that they're not the same as the ones for organizations or for nature or for other kinds of systems. Now, there is a lot of overlap. Someone could probably do the work of figuring out, like, what are the ground orders of love that apply to all systems, right? My guess is sort of honoring what is, respecting reality is one of those root kinds of, kinds of things, yeah? But that there were some differences, a lot of them quite subtle, in the orders of love as they apply to some of these different contexts. And when you started to look at these other contexts and you started to try to apply the orders of love that you had learned in families, you were actually starting to really mess stuff up, okay? So I'll give a couple of examples. One in nature. This is something that Francesca Mason-Boring makes a point of in her really lovely anthology on nature constellations work, is that, and it shows up right in the writing, because it's an anthology, different people have written. It's Returning to Membership in Earth Community, maybe the name of it. If you Amazon, search Francesca Mason-Boring and Nature Constellations, it will pop right up. It's a lovely little book. I highly recommend it as part of your Constellations library. But she says in the beginning, if you set up a constellation, say on climate change, and you put in a representative for Earth, and it shows up as, you're killing me, you're destroying me, right? She says, that's not Mother Earth speaking. Because nature doesn't function under those kinds of rules. From the human point of view, we are destroying Mother Earth. It's a perfectly legitimate order of love or perspective from the human family point of view. But from nature, it does not get upset when the tiger eats the monkey, right? It does not get upset when the asteroid comes and kills all the dinosaurs, right? So we have to be very careful when we start moving to nature systems about applying, and then later in the book, someone describes how Mother Nature is all upset about being destroyed. It's such high quality professionalism from Francesca Mason-Boring that she didn't take that out. She just lets it be there. She lets the contradiction be there, which I think is that's pretty cool. And then you get to decide, right? More relevantly to organizational constellations, okay? Seniority is super different. This is really, really important. So important that I wrote an article for the Knowing Field last issue on the understanding of seniority in the organizational in the systemic constellations world. Because what I found in a lot of threads of the constellations world, when we're talking about us, constellation people, and our lineages and Bert Hellinger and all that stuff, that's what? That's organizational, right? Affiliations, associations, professional, colleagues, a field of work, whether it's the legal industry or the steel industry, the constellations industry, that's all, we're talking about organizational stuff, right? People, there's a subset of people who want us to talk about Bert Hellinger in a father way. Father comes first, he's senior, we can't criticize him because he's father. And I say, au contraire, he is our founder. This is an organizational relationship with Bert Hellinger. And in that position, founders deserve a great deal of respect, right? But it's not the same as father. And in fact, what Bert Hellinger himself says is what? You have one father and one mother, and it is your job to take your mother and father and not to project it onto anything else, which is one of his main objections about the church. It's very ironic that this gets done with Bert Hellinger, given his own. That's more, there's more history there than you need to know about. But I wrote a whole article on the misunderstandings of seniority in the constellations world, particularly in Europe. It's very odd. Anyway, so you need to be very careful about going into organizational contexts, and that, because this is what would happen before Gunther Faber figured this stuff out, is that, CEO would be told everyone needs to, bow to the CEO because he's senior, right? And no end of damage would be done. Not that there isn't a core of truth in here, right? And this is what we need to get to. And the big difference, the big orders of love difference between families and organizations. In families, more or less authority equals seniority. Now, I'm going to say more or less. Even here, there are exceptions that matter. So, for instance, if you get a bad cancer diagnosis and you have a brother who's an oncologist and a mother who is not, they both have strong opinions about your treatment. Who should you listen to more? Your brother, right? Yeah. In cases in which parents are getting old, dementia, they're not able to take care of themselves, does seniority mean that you're not supposed to take care of them because they're senior to you? No. Of course you're supposed to take care of them. Yeah. Okay. So even in families, this is more complex sometimes in the way it's talked about. But as a general tool, especially when it's coming to constellations work, and even what authority means. I mean, something like, think about this sentence that we use in constellations very frequently. Dear mother and father, I honor the dignity of your fate. Please bless me as I choose a different way. Right? We were doing this with Lily, and with the fact that her father wanted a certain direction for her in her work life. Yeah. So it's even in families, it's more complex. But we'll just, organizations. And again, I need to define what we mean by organizations, and I'll get to there in a second. Authority is down to three things. Seniority matters. Obviously, if you have people in a similar job description, and one has been doing it a lot longer, we should probably listen to the one who's been doing it a lot longer, right? Seniority, role is really important. Think about the janitor who's been at a 500-person company for 30 years versus the CEO who's been there 2 weeks. Obviously, the CEO has more authority than the janitor, right? And competence. This is a really key thing that we have a really hard time with. Now, in a meritocracy, right, theoretically, this is all that matters, right? But there's some, two people the same amount of time in the same role, the one who has more competence theoretically should be getting more authority, right? The one who's just better at their job, shows up on time, all that stuff. But in real life, same seniority, same role, different competence, these things don't show up. right? They're somewhat different in seniority, and they're somewhat different in role, and they're somewhat different in competence. And then you're like, who's in charge, right? Who gets to decide this thing? My apologies, but there's no simplifying this. It's a balance of all three of these. This is what makes organizational constellations rather more complex than family ones. Any pastor who's gone into a church immediately runs into this stuff. Immediately. They're now that one at the top of the pyramid in terms of role, but they've got all these people who have been contributing to and making that church go for 20 or 30 years and giving their time and their effort. And they, at some level, you know, verbally they say, we're so glad to have you in your leadership. Please lead us. And everything they do prevents that because they are aware at some level of their own seniority and competence around knowing that community best. Let me tell you, there's almost nothing more complicated than becoming a pastor of a church, because at least in most businesses, the roles are kind of clear, theoretically. Okay? So, the other thing for organizations, belonging, in families, belonging is equals belonging in a sense. There's really no being kicked out of a family. Once you're born into it, done deal. Now, as we've already talked, there are other ways to acquire belonging as well, right? Someone gets murdered, perpetrators and victims, the buddies of the father who went to war, right? There are other ways to belong to a system together. But basically, belonging is permanent in families. By and large, in organizations, belonging is temporary. The person who has been fired or let go or died in the job no longer gets any authority. And they're out, you know, they don't belong anymore. Again, I like using churches for this because churches try and function like families a lot, which is a big mistake. And they have all kinds of confusions around this. So what will often happen is the family who gave the silver chalice 20 years ago will show up at membership voting day and say, we have a say. And the pastor will say, yeah, but you haven't been here for 20 years. Oh, our name's on the chalice. You believe me, you do not want to be a pastor. This stuff is minefield territory, right? This is nutso stuff, okay? Now, there are some exceptions. Systemically, founders tend to be permanent, even when they're no longer involved. You can set up, let's say, business Joe's Diner. Yeah, it was founded by Joe. It's even in the name, right? But Joe dies, and 3 owners later, right? You can put Joe into the constellation, and he will be relevant in some way. Like maybe they're dishonoring him, or maybe there's something that happened back then that never got resolved and included back then. Okay, so it needs to be included. So founders also, employees, usually people at the top of the system who have spectacular positive or negative impact on the business. So if they drive the business into the ground or if they save the business, very often years later, like again, when it comes to churches, the people who were pastors and then split the church and took half of them off to, you know, to the Eastern Orthodox or something. If you put that person into a constellation about that church, he or she will still have a relevant role in the system, and it needs to be integrated in some way. Yeah. So there are some exceptions. There are some ways in which there's some permanent belonging, but not necessarily at the level of authority in making decisions, but in terms of the constellation you may set up, right? And around the invisible systemics. The other thing that I like to include here for organizational constellations, so authority, belonging, and something else that isn't quite the same, and this is my observation, I haven't seen this talked about other places, but fairness in business is way more important than almost any other context I've seen, in organizations, excuse me. Families care about fairness, but they care about seniority and role way more, yeah? But fairness, the people who got laid off after years of serving the company and the layoff was done in the worst way possible, that tends to have resonances for that business for a really long time. Yeah. So fairness tends to be, in organizational contexts, sort of systemic unfairness tends to set off difficult stuff in family systems. Okay? So these are all things that you're going to be looking at if you set up something that you might call a pure organizational constellation. So what do we mean by, an organization? It's a very broad category. Businesses, obviously, nonprofits, churches, neighborhood groups, vocational associations. If there was something going wrong in this building here and we set up a constellation for it, that would be an organizational constellation. Yeah. Also, informal relations, as I was describing in the constellations world. Those relationships between colleagues, even when there's no formal structure for those colleagues, that's really an organizational context. Yeah. And basically, yeah, I'll leave that there. The other thing that's really important for the work that you do, and this ends up being very relevant very frequently for people who do this for most of their professional work, is that organizational constellations often sort of merge into or are combined with family ones. So let's say you have a CEO who's coming to you on behalf of their organization, and they want a consultation, they want a constellation on this merger they're thinking about having. Yeah. At some point in that process, it certainly makes sense that what might pop up is the CEO's relationship with his dad and how he might be working it out in the contemplation of having this merger. Need to look successful for dad, or living up to dad's expectations, or making up for some violation in the family, or an overcoming of the trauma of World War II, blah, 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 blah. Okay. So at some point in that process, it is possible that you might, go, Mr. CEO, client, can I bring in your dad? Because it looks like it's relevant to what you're trying to do here. Okay. So that you can go forward with the merger or not on its own merits, not because you're working out a family issue. Okay. The place where this gets super complicated are family businesses. So when you have a father or mother or parents found a company, or grandparents, or think about being one of the Ford kids now. I mean, that's a family business that's gone, right? Usually part of the DNA is all the family stuff. And when we're usually talking family businesses and the kind of clients you might have, it's probably something like you're working for your dad and his accounting business. Yeah. And he's getting elderly and it's feeling like time for you to take it over or whatever. Then it's all mushy. Then it's all really mushy, right? And so being really clean and clear about what's showing up as a family issue where we're honoring, in that instance, we need to honor the seniority of the father in the role of giving life to the client. But there might be some place where you need to find a way for the representative of the father to step away from the business and not be in the place of seniority. So how do you have that dual, respect and elderhood and stepping away from, so that the son can now run the business in a clean and clear kind of a way. Yeah. So it can be quite complex. Yeah. Okay. This is really important stuff. So, organizational constellations as main focus. I'm not going to go into this too much, but there are people. Volker Frank is a local friend of mine, you may have heard of. He was at my party. They don't hang out their hat usually as organizational constellations people. They're hanging out their hat as organizational consultants, right? So they have a business, self-employed, whatever, as consultants of one sort or another. Either, executive coaches or, in his case, genuine organizational consultants. If this is something you start to think, I might like to do this, okay, there's just a few things that I want to name about this, because I really want you to be clear. At the end of this weekend, you are not going to be qualified to do this. I've had people go off and start doing essentially organizational consulting, and I listen to their stories of like setting up the team with representatives for their parents, and they're all seeing each other's family traumas, and they're like, what the fuck? Because there's some boundaries here. And so the first thing you really need is some organizational training. There is a whole profession out there, right? Fielding Institute is one of the main places that a lot of my friends have gotten their masters in on organizational development. Getting training on where do I have it here? On organizational models and principles, organizational development, leadership theories, appreciative inquiry, team building, all that stuff. There is a skill set here. Organizational psychology is a whole thing. Yeah. And if this is the main thing you're going to do, or you're going to do much of it, you should decide you're going to get yourself informed about this one way or another. There's also CCR. I'm not going to remember it. There's a group down in San Mateo or something who basically train people for kind of doing this kind of stuff. And they do have a constellations piece, which is kind of fun. If you're interested, I can share that with you. I can't remember their name right now. I have to look it up. Okay. Jane Peterson is one of the people who, well, let me say it. So one, organizational training of some sort or another, and then an organizational constellation training. The main people for this are Jane Peterson in Portland, and Jan Jakob Stam in the Netherlands. He, by the way, is a good book you can get down on your Kindle called Systemic Coaching. I love Jan Jakob. He's one of those. He's one of those people like Bert Hellinger. Francesca Mason-Boren is kind of one of these people who's got half a foot in other realms, and they're going through life like there's something a little shamanic about who they are all the time, which makes them feel a little dangerous to be around, but in a kind of an exciting kind of a way.
Why dangerous?
Because they're dealing with the other side a little bit. Is part of where they're living most of their lives. A good shaman should always feel a little dangerous, right? But I totally adore him, and I really love his stuff. You can look up his stuff online and whatnot. He's very turned down on his videos, so I don't know if you can find something where he's really up. But he usually has a moment in a constellation where, like, I remember he turned to one woman. I'll never forget this. Let's just pretend you're the client. She's sitting in the chair watching. He turns to her and he says, "You're a bit dangerous, aren't you?" And her eyes were really big, like, "No, I'm not. I'm a very good, safe, nice person." I mean, it was like right at the point of her, and he had her, and you can't do that kind of thing unless your rapport is just like amazing, right? The rest of us can't do that sort of thing. But anyway, so if you want to, this is something you can pursue. There are lots of books. There are places to do training, short workshops, blah, 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 blah. But if you just take your family constellations tool into organizations for organizational consulting, without some of this basic knowledge about how organizations work and organizational psychology, you're going to be in over your head so fast. They're going to be sitting there going, "You don't know what you're doing." They just are, because you don't. The other thing here that's really why you want to pursue some of this is that the contract that you have with businesses is different. And you need to be really clear about your contract. I've talked about that a little bit with you in terms of with the ordinary sort of, sort of client you're going to see. What is your contract with your client? You have kind of an explicit contract. I'm going to give you this service, and you're going to give me a check, and there's sort of the explicit contract. And then there's a lot of implicit contract stuff. Like, I'm just going to be really sort of explicit about this. Like, you wouldn't like call up their mother and tell them about the constellation the client just had. Because it's not part of your contract, right? And they trust you to stay in the realm of your contract. This is very much so with organizations as well. Obviously, there's an explicit contract. That's not the most interesting and important aspect. That can be written out and you can have clear agreements about that. But things like how vulnerable, a CEO's got to function the next day, and stay CEO and be able to stay in that role. If you put in a representative for the CEO who breaks down crying in front of his team, you may have just done a great deal of damage to the ability of that CEO to function. Organizations, by and large, do not function by our rules around, if you see someone crying, we give safe space for that, and there's a lot of room for it, right? No? So how vulnerable? Who's involved? This is a really interesting question, which Constellation's people who work in the organizational context they've been working on this so hard. So the CEO comes to you. What do you do with them? Right? Do you have an interview with the CEO and then you get a group of neutral representatives together to do a constellation on behalf of the CEO, in which case is the CEO there or not? Do you do constellations with the whole team? Do you do constellations with the leadership team? Do they represent each other? Do they represent it all? Do you bring people in from the outside? All this stuff, right? What do you do? And who knows about what's unfolding here? And how limited is the, who's involved in what do you look at? How narrow or broad is the focus? If it's really clear, you're working with a team of, say, vice presidents who have decided to address this issue in the organization, and what's becoming clear is that there's a conflict between two of them, which is making the entire team unable to function. And what's going on is they're projecting their mothers at each other. Totally realistic kind of situation, right? Is that what you show to the team? Right? Or do you just kind of show a little bit and say, you know what? The whole team is focusing its attention on the difficulty between these two. What would you like to do about that? No? This is very sensitive business. Yeah? And what I've seen, I had a friend in particular, he got drawn into a contract with a real estate team, and he had them all showing each other's guts to each other, and they went into full-on rebellion. Because that wasn't their contract. I didn't sign up for this. This is my workplace. Right? I don't want to talk about my dad here. Right? Yeah. Unless there's an agreement that's what you're doing. And that would be a pretty special company. Right? Pretty remarkable place. And there's ways in which it actually wouldn't be appropriate. It's like this is a workplace. What I find a lot of, there are two kind of categories that organizational constellations often sort of constellate around. Problems around role, around who's doing what and not being in their positions. And I'll say more about that. And the other one is history, by which we often mean trauma to the business itself or within the field of the business. So for instance, when I was in Australia and I didn't even understand totally what was going on because I don't know the history of Australia very well. but Jan Jakob Stam was there and doing a constellation with a business. And what kept popping up were roles of people who kept on acting like traumatized soldiers. And what was very clear was that the business had some connection with some government betrayal of military people, which I didn't understand because I didn't understand the history. But there was something around there that was in the business, that needed some acknowledging and honoring. If you've built your business on top of native lands, if the business itself had a trauma, like Dad built up this wonderful accounting firm, and then his brother came and stole half of it, and now it's taken another generation to rebuild it. Or a tsunami came in and wiped it away. Or it doesn't now, but in the past it used to make war weapons, right? There's all kinds of ways in which, and this stuff is very appropriate. It feels more family constellation-y, but it's, history isn't just about families, it's about everything. And that's, straight, once you found it, it's very, take the people now and honor these things. You have the tools for that, right? It's the same stuff we've talked about in family contexts in which, that which has not been honored or seen or included is going to keep, showing up. Okay, so that's fairly straightforward. This is also in a way fairly straightforward, but again, it has to be taken into account in this context, okay, of, the complexity of these three things: seniority, role, and competence. Very frequently what we have here is a leader who's not stepping fully into leadership, or employees trying to, and this is all very unconscious, right? It's going to come out in the constellation work, but employees who are in some sense not letting the leader be the leader. The leader is not stepping into leadership, or that the system has given too much authority to the employees. Yeah. Also cross-departmental kinds of authority. An emeritus pastor who's actually butting into the church community too much and getting in the way of the ability of the new rector to function, right? The vice president of personnel butting into the work of the HR department, that kind of thing. And how do we honor and respect the different roles? The other piece that's often is clarity around mission or purpose of the organization, right? And what you'll find, it's really, really common. I mean, in the end, what you want, in resolutions, is you want a situation where basically everyone's focused on the mission, is putting it first, right? Because that's what a business is there to make semiconductors, or a business is there or a nonprofit is there to employ homeless people, or a business is there to, prevent climate change, whatever it is. Yeah? That you want the representatives to be focused on and that coming first. So very frequently you'll have a representative for mission or goal or product, depending upon how you name it. And you'll find like it's over in the corner going, no one's interested in me. Because there's so much else going on, in the system. So stuff around mission, around history, trauma, around role are some of the three really big buckets. And one of the other mess ups in role, you put in a representative for the clients, and the clients are trying to be in charge. Or on the other end, the clients, no one's noticing the clients or the customers of the business. Yeah. So let me see what else. Now, what you might often end up finding is, as you know, if you stay in your family constellation's lane, is that these things are going to arise. So I would say about 3 or 4 times a year, I have a client with an issue that's mostly more appropriately understood as an organizational constellation. I have one constellation. I love her. Who's seen me work with Stephanie from Houston? I think you might have seen it once. No? You've definitely seen me work with Stephanie in Houston with the washateria. You had to have seen that. So it's got all of this stuff, and it's actually really, really good. I almost should I have videotaped, recorded most of hers because she's in Houston and she wants to record them. But it's like I've worked with them so many times over so many years that like I should put them all together as like a teaching on working with family businesses. But she lives in Houston. She's a Vietnamese American woman who came here in the 70s. The whole family has the classic extreme Vietnam trauma history. 13 siblings, mother, managed to get them all here, Thai pirates, rape, war, everything. I mean, it's a really hard history. But like many Vietnamese, they ended up in Houston, and they are entrepreneurs, let me tell you. And they own this laundromat around which there's been enormous drama over the last several years that she keeps coming to me for constellations around. And sometimes they are really, really, really organizational, in which we have representatives for, their landlord who's making life hell for them, and how the person who wants to, because they want to sell it, the buyer, the loan agent, all these different things, and getting things back in better order. There's been a lot of family angles on it because it's a family business, around giving a good place for the mother and all of this, around honoring and acknowledging the trauma history of the family. And one of the major interventions we made over the years is they have a story of themselves as kind of weak and they go through life kind of like, we want to be the nice guys, and they keep getting steamrollered. And I finally said, today this narrative stops. You guys are warriors. You survived Vietnam. The things you survived, nobody in this room has had to survive. And she and all the representatives went, damn right, we're warriors. And the whole room, it just really changed the energy of everything. So you're going to have something like that perhaps show up. I had one client who was very interesting multinational business that she was one of, she wasn't the founder, but she was one of the early partners. And something was going weird in the different offices around the world. So we kind of looked into that. So every once in a while, these will show up. But what you'll mostly have are people who come to you and say, I have an issue with money or an issue with work. And then what you've got is more or less a classic family constellation with some organizational type elements. And we'll do some of those later today. Okay. I think that's all I really wanted to say about that. So questions or comments on this? Yeah.
I'm not seeing how you would manage the stuff you have in the contract. You put in a representative for the CEO. You don't know what he's going to do. I mean, you can't say, well, don't cry, And
yeah, no, that's a really good question.
And what do you look at? I mean, stuff comes up. You don't have any control over what comes up.
Right. So, so yes and no. Yes and no. Remember, I've talked with you guys about setting your context and your intentions for the group. So if you have a bunch of newbies in the room, you might set your attention for work that isn't quite as intense as you would with a group of really seasoned, experienced representatives, right? And when you set your heart intention at one level, and you also say you might have a different set of guidelines for those two groups, right? You can set up guidelines for the constellations that you set up in these contexts. Yeah, like, and by the way, if you're in an organizational constellation, the likelihood of someone going full out crying stuff, just systemically, the culture of it is going to get super unlikely, right? It's just really unlikely, and that's culture creation. It's the culture that you're working in already. And in fact, even if you're working all with people in that business, getting the constellation, you might have to work with something so much simpler than you're used to, because they haven't had role modeled all of that sophisticated representing you've seen. Yeah. So there's the culture you're going to inherit. There's the culture you're going to set by how you do the introductions and the pre-work that you do. Yeah. And then there's the setting of your own intention, all of which is going to feed into what shows up. I mean, we all know that, you can flat, keep anything from happening at all, right? Yeah. And there is, once it's underway, you continue to have an authority and responsibility if you feel like something is going out of contract. And I mean this implicit contract, not the literal written one, but like, oh, I'm starting to undermine the CEO's authority by what's showing up here, for instance, right? What can you do? You can stop it, right? Because your responsibility is to the client. Yeah. So if you literally see a process, I mean, I've been known to do this in a different context, in which what's showing up, it's honest, it's real, but I can see it's not useful for my client. It's doing something funky to him or her. And I'll just redirect. Sometimes I get representatives who don't have great boundaries. And it's not great. You probably maybe noticed me do this. Hopefully it's subtle enough that it's not too harsh. But I can see that, my client has got a very hyperactive neurology. They're starting to get triggered. And someone over there is wanting to scream. And I'll say, I'm going to ask you to turn that down. Right? So please don't ever think that you're just somehow subject to the wiles of the field and of people who come along. You have to own your leadership in this, because we are opening people up to something quite new and possibly quite powerful, right? And in this context, to answer that question, I would really recommend you go and watch Jan Jakob work. See how this is actually done and how people who are actually working with organizational clients manage this stuff, yeah, and stay in contract, implicit contract with the people that they're working with. So they're this sort of do no harm thing. Is that helpful?
Sort of, but
Yeah.
still not too clear. I mean, seems to be a conflict between we're looking for information from the field and then saying, well, yeah, but not that information or something like that.
So there's some different points of view on this. And I've been sort of sharing with you mine on this, which is that we as facilitators are always shaping what's showing up, whether we're intending to or not. We just are. The field is not just some neutral thing that will, if you three did the same constellation, the same stuff would show up? No, new, right? We're always shaping what's showing up. Yeah. So this is one of those, Leslie's likely to take what? The middle ground, right? That's always what I'm generally trying to do. So over here, and this is just a bit of a refresher, on this end is total facilitator control. And over here is what we might call a free-for-all. I've seen these. They're not constellations. They're just enacted psychotherapy. Drives me nuts. Now you're going to be the father, and you're going to stand over there, and then you're going to say, and you're never asked about what you're experiencing, right? Free-for-all. By the end, everybody in the room has a role. Everyone's getting recruited left and right. If you have, literally, I saw this with a guy from Serbia. We had 40 people in the room, and all of them had roles. It was a nightmare. Now, this is something Jan Jakob Stam says. He says, you set up a constellation, something's going to happen. The question is whether it's useful or not. I set up the tripod, the table, and the chair. Something's going to happen. Yeah? The question is whether it's useful or not. The question of whether it becomes useful or not is how we step into our facilitator role and to the degree that we own the principles of the contract, of the orders of love, of our professional ethics, all that stuff, right? And then we throw our own personal style into the mix. Yeah? I believe we should be hanging out somewhere in here, in this space. So it means that we're doing some shaping, consciously and unconsciously. The more conscious we can make it, the better. I'm stopping this now because I'm now out of contract with the CEO. Is much better than stopping it and not knowing why you're doing it, but you've just gotten scared. Or unconsciously blocking, like being kind of like blocking something without even knowing you're kind of doing it, right? Yeah? And then on this side, to allow information to come from the field so that something genuinely new can be seen. Yeah? This is my perspective. There are people who function like this, and there are people who function like this. And there are people, it's so funny, I was talking with a friend who shall go unnamed, but I've talked with you about options constellations, and be careful about taking them too literally. You still have choices that you need to make. Constellations deal in a lot of metaphors and symbols and da-da-da-da. I was talking with a friend who's a constellation expert, and he says, oh, I always do what my options constellations tell me to do. I trust them completely. And, when it tells me to sell my stock, I sell my stock. And I'm like, whoa. So I'm just noting, okay, that's a different point of view. It's not something I recommend or believe in, but part of what I'm trying to do here is also let you know about the range of practice that's out there. Yeah. If you're going into organizational constellations, if you're going to go there, you need to be willing to own some of this. If you want to be in this space, I highly recommend you stay out of organizational contexts. You'll get fired soon anyway. Probably, depending upon, the context in which you were working. Does that make sense? Is that helpful?
Yeah, I can kind of see how what do you look at, that's, you could redirect, say, we're not going to go there.
Yeah.
But how would you deal with the too vulnerable CEO or whoever you feel like they're getting too vulnerable? What would you do?
Be a little clearer with your question. I'm sorry. Give me the actual situation you're imagining.
Well, you put in a representative for the CEO, and you're seeing whatever you're seeing that makes you think he's
Right.
becoming too vulnerable, or you're making him too vulnerable.
Well, then you're going to return to the orders of love. I mean, you can just end or redirect. Let's for a moment imagine you're the CEO and these two are representing, I mean, you're representing the CEO and the two of you are representing vice presidents under the CEO. Okay? Let's just imagine that for a moment. And that what shows up is these two very honestly saying things like, I feel like that one's weak. Or I feel like that one shouldn't be trusted. Let's just say that's the information that's coming through. Right? Let's just say it's Elena's representative, Maria Elena's representative is saying that. And so I might say, try this healing sentence. Okay. Look at the one who represents your CEO and can you say, I really want to respect you and put you first. Help me do that. Okay? Right? And sorry, it's the new phone. I haven't got notifications worked out yet. Yeah. So it's sticking with the reality that, you know, and of wanting to have this one in their place in the system, right? Right? And then this one will say, might say something like, that really strengthens me. And I would like your support in figuring out how to do that. And then this one might say, okay, you got it. Right? Yeah? Yeah?
Okay.
Okay. If the too vulnerable is something more like your role says something like, let's say you represent the business. Maria Elena represents the business. And your representative says, I feel like I have something to prove when it comes to you, and I don't know how to do it. Okay. Now, our interview has revealed that father was sent to jail for some mispropriety in work. And we're not going to say that to the group, right? So I might say, okay, try this sentence. I bring some history to this moment that I honor, and I want a fresh start with you, if I can. Okay? So I'm just making this stuff up, right?
And you're good at it.
Yeah? Well, instead of bringing in the father and the propriety and the trauma in the family, I wouldn't bring that in. It's not my job to make the CEO that vulnerable.
But
Yeah.
in your interview, you're kind of getting the same
I might.
the family history.
I might. Again, it's all going to very much depend upon your context. It's really contextual, right? This is why you need these things. This is why this is not an organizational constellation training. In order to know how to interview for your contract and what's the information that you need and who are the stakeholders and Jan Jakob Stamm, he's like, I don't like being a consultant because it gives you a consultant is usually here to improve the functioning of HR or, their job is to help the merger happen successfully or stuff like that. He's just like, I hate that. I just want to be a coach. So he really limits his contract because he wants to leave the entire team free given the systemic information he's brought forth to go forth and make decisions. Yeah? The consultant has the job of actually making it, get us through the merger. And he thinks this clears him up to actually be more honest with the systemics, the organizational systemics. He's got a whole shtick on that. But he's like this is a really hard living to make. You can put out your shingle as a consultant and make a living. He's so famous in his field in Europe. He can make a living just sticking with a much narrower sort of task and still make a good living doing it. In the US, you're probably going to have to hang out your shingle as a consultant. Organizational constellations are almost unknown in the US. They're taken for granted in Europe, and they're very big in certain Spanish-speaking below-the-border countries, in Portuguese-speaking countries. Just for instance, in Brazil, as I've mentioned, they're using constellations in legal contexts a lot, for like mediation, for civil suits, divorce, using understanding the invisible systemics to contribute to a positive outcome. Of course, what that requires is giving up on the whole adversarial system approach to justice, but it's another conversation. So there are places where this is really having an impact. Yeah. I mean, if you imagine someone, I don't know, well, let's not even go there. So this is other questions or thoughts about this material. Then we'll go into a break. People finding this interesting, intriguing.
Yes, very much so.
The other, if you never do organizational constellations work, if what this makes you realize is that you're dealing with, there are many different kinds of systems out there, and broaden your sense of this a bit, and that you need to be sensitive to your contexts. Not so much context in the sense of like environment, but like what system are we looking at? And then if you're going to look at that system, you need to be an expert in that kind of system. So family, hopefully you've got some expertise on family stuff, but the more you can get, great. Organizational, you should bring organizational expertise. Nature, ditto. And then if you're going to do chakras, constellations, you should be an expert in that system. Or, just know what you're doing. Or if you're going to do Enneagram stuff, which now that I think about it would be really cool. Like on a team, it would be interesting. You better know your Enneagram. If you do 5 elements Chinese, you better know your 5 elements Chinese. And then you can see when the orders are being disrupted in the context of that system that you understand, right? So if it just opens this up a little bit for you. And then I'm going to bring it either today or tomorrow, transpersonal elements and constellations, and doing constellations and transpersonal on soul or God or angels or higher self or, all that kind of stuff, transpersonal stuff. That gets really tricky because what the hell are the orders with respect to that stuff? It really depends upon your religious point of view, metaphysical point of view. This is why I could not get a handle on, I told you I did past life constellations, which is a different system. But which one? There's not just one past life system. There's Hinduism, there's Buddhism, there's New Agey kind of stuff, which is different from both of those, and Akashic records and blah, 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 blah. I just couldn't feel the orders. And I had messes on my hands. The clients are getting so cranky with me. And I'm like, I'm not doing this anymore. We lost her. We're going to take a break now anyway. So
Are we late for her?
no, it's very late for her. But she said she was going to stick through it. So let's have a break until 12 noon.